fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. Welcome back into the show, Keith, our second show of training camp preview.
Yeah, so this time we're taking a look at the defense and our five storylines that we're most excited about, most interested in, ones we're going to be watching really closely. And the defense this year I think is really interesting, in part because of my first storyline, which is, what does the new scheme look like? We don't even fully know. We have an idea based on the coaches that we are hired, but we've also had them come out and say, well, yeah, but it's still Pete Carroll and he's a 4-3 guy. So it's not going to be entirely just a 3-4. It sounds like they're going to be very multi front and very hybrid. And what exactly that means is something we haven't seen yet. So we'll find out what this new scheme looks like.
I think, interestingly enough, you combined all of those categories into three of my storylines that I'm going to be watching. So I think we'll talk about all three here. But one of my storylines is our new defensive coaching staff, an upgrade over last year. And I think we're going to get an answer really quick.
The answer is going to be yes, because when you're at the bottom, you can't really go down.
Yeah, so and we were at the bottom in quite a few different categories last year. I mean, we were, most of those had to do with pressure percentages and so forth. We were 26th in early down pressure percentages. We were ranked 27th in pressure rate and 24th in sacks on third down. We often, and we talked about this numerous times, about how Ken Norton Jr. And staff just didn't put players in a position to be successful. And I think part of that, if you really look at this, and one of the categories that I had here is what can we expect from our new 3-4 front? And one of the reasons I think that we were kind of not wonkish, but a little out of sorts last year was that we had 4-3 personnel kind of trying to be in a 3-4 scheme. And so we had some quote unquote linebackers that really weren't linebackers, that were more edge rushers or Leos or, base defensive ends like Benson Mayoa and Carlos Dunlap dropping back into coverage too much. And they just weren't good at it. And it left us vulnerable in our secondary. And so our secondary was bad. Conversely, we couldn't get any real pass rush. We couldn't get any pressure. And so the whole thing just didn't work. You had deficits on the back end, deficits on the front end, and our defense was mediocre as a result. So Pete Carroll threw all that out the window and decided to revamp the whole thing. Actually, one of the best moves I think he's made in 11 years, because it took a lot of guts, I think, for a 70-year-old coach, defensive-minded coach, to throw out everything that he knew, that he had brought in, that he had depended upon to make them competitive in the NFL, and started over really from scratch. And kind of handed the whole thing to some young guys, some young up-and-coming talent in this league. Clint Hurt, I think, is going to be a really decent defensive play caller in this defense. And he brought in some assistants that I'm just excited for. Carl Scott and Sean Desai. Vic Fangio kind of disciples all three of them. And so this defense has me excited. And we went out and we got some guys in free agency, and we drafted some guys specifically to operate within this scheme. And some of there's going to be lack of experience on some of these guys. Some, in the cornerback room specifically, but also rushing the passer. We're depending upon some guys that haven't been on the team, like Uchenna Nwasu. I think is primed to have a really, really great year here. Guys that we brought in, like Quentin Jefferson, that are back for their second run in Seattle, I think are really have me excited about the front seven of this defense now, because we have some guys that actually really can affect the passer. And it'll be interesting to see how it just all comes together.
Yeah. Also, rookies like Boye Mafe, and how is he going to be used? Because he is, a guy that was drafted as a pass rusher, but is going to be a 3-4 outside linebacker. So how do these new minds prevent what happened last year, where you had Carlos Dunlap, who's an elite pass rusher, dropping back into coverage where he's terrible? How do they do that with that same idea, but with Boye Mafe? And can they use his skill set properly in the best way, so that way they're getting the most out of him being on the field?
Well, the nice thing about Boye Mafe is he does have experience playing outside linebacker. He does have experience with a 2-point stance, and then dropping back and going forward as well. So he's just better at it than Ben Semeoa and Carlos Dunlap were. So I think it's just a scheme fit. That's all that is. But he's young. This is a guy that's basically going to rely on his motor this year, while he's learning how to be an NFL player, learning the nuances of offenses and his own defense. And so it'll be interesting to see how that comes along. I would expect a guy like Boye Mafe has a much better second half of the season than he does the first half. But who knows, when you get guys like this with all this potential and athletic prowess, they can have a real effect early on as well if they just get turned loose. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. My biggest storyline on my list was the cornerback competition. And the reason that I put the cornerback competition, because it really is a competition. It really is one of the larger competitions on this roster. We talked about wide receivers when we did the offensive side of the ball in that show. Same thing with the cornerback room. You've got guys like Sidney Jones and Trey Brown and Artie Burns and Cody Bryant and Tariq Woolen all competing essentially for 2 starting roles for the outside corner spots on this team. Now, you could say that Tariq Woolen's probably a step down from those other guys, but we just don't know for sure yet. Maybe he comes in and just wows them and they can't keep him off the field.
He's the most athletic of the group by a wide margin.
Yeah. So right now he's on my list until he's knocked out. But you want to be able to hand one of these starting jobs to Sidney Jones. But right now it's so wide open. I think the team really does want to see what they've got. Does Trey Brown come in right away and come back from that injury, or is he going to start the year on the PUP list and give the other guys an opportunity to come in? Cody Bryant. Everyone's talking about Cody Bryant being one of the most competent corners already in this competition. And he hasn't even played it down yet, but he just comes in with that knowledge base and quiet confidence that you have as a corner at the collegiate level, at the highest level that he was at.
And that's why they drafted him
right away.
That's why they drafted him, is because they knew, he doesn't have the upside of other corners in this draft, even nowhere near the upside of Tariq Woolen, but he was a guy that was viewed across the league as a guy who could come in and start right now and be good. Not great, but be good and start right now. Like, there's not that developmental lag that you normally get with college players coming into the NFL. It's the general consensus across the league was that Bryant was ready now. And so with him and Jones, I think you've got your starters, but Artie Burns wants something to say about that. If Trey Brown or Trey
Brown.
Is it Trey Brown?
Yeah.
Like, that does sound right. But
they had the patella last year.
Yeah. If he's healthy, he's going to want to say something about, that's that group of starters. And,
yes, of course.
And you've got a room that's deep, but there's no established, like, number one. There's no Richard Sherman on this roster. There's no, guy that's established as, hey, this is the elite corner in the group. You've got a deep but not high-end talent across the board. The only person with the potential to truly become that high-end talent is Tariq Woolen, but he's got the farthest to go.
Yes,
that's exactly right. He's got the lowest floor. So, Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting competition. Like you mentioned, comparing it to the wide receivers, but we know who the starting 2 wide receivers are, right? It doesn't get interesting in the wide receiver room until the third person.
Yes.
In the cornerback battle, that number 1 spot is up for grabs.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't even talked about nickel. You got Amadi and Justin Coleman is coming back onto the roster. They signed him to a deal.
And if Trey Brown's healthy, he fits into that that competition as well.
He could very well. Maybe, yeah. I mean, they really started him outside last year just by necessity. Sidney Jones hadn't come along yet. Now he's there. Maybe Trey Brown slides inside. Maybe that gives him the best option, and you keep Ugo Amadi as a true safety in a too high safety situation. Amadi becomes maybe a better safety option for the team. So it'd be very interesting how that shakes out.
Well, you kind of hinted on my next storyline, and that when you start talking about the safeties, how are they going to use Jamal Adams? That's my next one, because if they're going to put him in the back as a too high safety, look like they did at the start of last year, that's wasting his skill set and putting him in a position where his skills doesn't line up. He's an in the box guy who's physical. He hits people who come across the middle. He blitzes. That's what he does best. That's who he is, and where he can make the biggest impact. You put him as a deep free safety, and his coverage skills just aren't that good.
Yeah.
And he's going to get beat.
I did hear Clint Hurt say that Jamal Adams actually has greatly improved his coverage skills from the beginning of last year to where he got hurt. So we'll see how they view him. I know for a fact they want to have their free safeties interchangeable. And I don't know if that necessarily means Jamal Adams. It kind of by default does, in a sense that he's going to be out there, like, if he's healthy 100% of the plays. And so when he's on the field and the scheme is demanding that he's dropping back into coverage, he's going to be the guy. This was number 5 on my list. Can Jamal Adams have a rebound season, and can the coaches finally impact the game and optimize his usage? Was my headline. And I think so. I think Clint Hurt has a much better handle on this than the other scheme. And Carl Scott, along with Sean Desai, are just experts in the field as far as defensive backs. And you still have Pete Carroll overall as well. So, and Jamal Adams is a special, unique player when healthy. My big concern with Jamal is he's had 2 surgeries now. His fingers are just mangled. Does this guy continue to go play instinctively, or is he making more business decisions than ever, which will impact his effectiveness on the field? So, and the question also in a 3-4 front is, will they blitz their box safety a lot in this game? I think they will. I think that you're going to see him have 4 or 5 sacks, and maybe not 9 or 10 like he had a couple of years ago. But I think that they are going to be able to use him effectively in disguises and coming up and rushing the passer as well. So I'm looking, my third storyline out of this whole group is, do we have enough pass rushers on the team? And talking about the pass rush in general, what can we expect from our 3-4 front? And we talked about, the scheme with Ben Sameoa and Carlos Dunlap. Those guys are gone. They were replaced by Uchenna Nwasu and Boy Mafe, essentially. And then you've still got Darrell Taylor and Alton Robinson. And then you've added Shelby Harris and Quentin Jefferson. This team has gotten better, quite a bit better, actually, to a fairly decent run-stopping team last year. I think they were top 7 or 6 at stopping the run effectively last year. Just getting to the pass rusher was the issue, and I think they really greatly improved without sacrificing stopping the run. Now, you take a look at Shelby Harris; he's very effective at that. Quentin Jefferson is really effective, but Quentin Jefferson's going to give you 30 quarterback pressures, on the season, maybe even 40. And then Puna Ford and Al Woods round out that ability to stop the run. But my big key is Uchenna Nwasu. coming over from the Chargers in free agency, and Boye Mafe, their draft pick, and Alton Robinson and Taylor are going to be our pass rushers this year. Can they be effective? I'm counting on it, really, because the entire scheme depends on the pressure rate, really. You don't necessarily need to bring a quarterback down to be effective. You got to have that pressure rate, though.
Well, and you talked about Harris and Jefferson. I mean, those are your 3-4 defensive ends, right? They're bigger guys. These aren't speed rushers that come off the edge. These are bigger guys that come up the middle in 3-4. And then you've got the 4 that you mentioned that are coming off the edge. As they're the outside linebackers in the 3-4. So you've got not just the speed rushers where they're 4 deep at, but you've got the 2 guys that can come and provide pressure more up the middle, which makes the speed rushers better because the quarterback can't just step up and get away from it. They have to get rid of the ball because there's nowhere else to go. And so that I thought was the key. I mean, yeah, you got to get the guys like Nuasu and Mafe and Taylor and all of them. But if you don't have any interior pressure, those guys just aren't as effective. They're not as, I mean, they're productive in terms of pressure, but they're not going to get sacks. They're not going to be able to truly impact the plays because the quarterback can just step up away from them. And so the other 2 they really make that front better.
So Quentin Jefferson has produced at least 30 quarterback pressures in 4 consecutive seasons, and has a career high 50 quarterback pressures for the Las Vegas Raiders in 2021. This is a guy that still has it, and we need it. And I think it's coming in spades this year. I think it's going to be a drastically different look for the Seahawks as far as pressure is concerned. This group has got an opportunity here if the starters at cornerback can be ironed out. I really do believe that this defense has an opportunity to be top 10. Just on paper, they do. The question is, can it all come together in time to have a great season?
Before we talk about that, I want to talk about my next storyline, which is the linebacker depth. And by that, I don't mean the pass rushing outside linebackers. I mean, there's no Bobby Wagner in the middle. So you've got Jordan Brooks and you've got Nick Ballore. No, he's the Barton. Cody Barton. Wow. Got my B names confused, but Cody Barton. And then what? It's not like Barton has a history.
And then you got a special teams specialist that we brought over from Chicago, Joel Leabunawe. Yeah. That's it. And then you've got Ben Burkervin, who's probably not even going to make the roster. Tanner Muse, who's kind of a tweener. He's only 220 pounds. They've got him at linebacker.
John Radigan. Outside linebacker only. Yeah, John Radigan or
coming off injury. Yeah.
Or Donker. I mean, those are the guys that's all you've got behind Brooks and Barton.
But do you need more than that with the line that we have and the pass rushers we have on the team? Do you need more than Barton and Brooks to really be effective?
You need depth because Barton has had injury issues all the time he's been in Seattle. He has gotten banged up and all of that. That's part of why he hasn't gotten in as a starter until now. I think you've got to have at least a backup. You've got to have someone that you trust. In the past, like last 3 years, it was Barton, right? He was the guy that could come in and give you that depth that you needed in just in case. And I don't think they've got that.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, that Joel Leabunawe, I think he's only got like 10 or 12 defensive snaps in 5 years. And everything else has been on special teams. He's
a special teams player. That's why I brought up Nick Ballore because he's a fullback / linebacker. And he actually looks to be the third middle linebacker right now. I mean, Donker and Radigan have a chance to unseat him fairly quickly, but
those are better players. Let's be honest. Donker and Radigan are better players. I think they'd love to see Radigan come in and play. Now, it's just, we're talking about the 48th to 53rd guy on the roster here is basically what we're talking about. And so,
I mean, we're talking about someone who's one snap away from being a starter.
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking about someone.
I agree. And I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm just saying, yeah, I agree with you, but I think that they probably are, counting on this Buena guy to be able to come in and kind of be that guy. I mean, he was essentially in that role for Chicago. He didn't get a lot of snaps because they didn't have injury, but he was kind of their guy to do that. That was my number 4 category. Is our linebacker room a strength or a weakness? Mm-hmm. I think it depends on what you take a look at what the linebackers are, because in this scheme, our outside linebackers are the pass rushers here. The inside linebackers are really what we were talking about. We talked about the pass rushers, but I wanted to drill down specifically on 2 players. What can we expect from Nuasu and Alton Robinson this year?
Oh, that's a great question, because I mean, Nuasu, you look at his productivity as a Charger, and it wasn't really there
until the second half of last year.
Yeah, he's a guy that has the athleticism and the skills and whatnot, but for some reason it didn't translate. And then all of a sudden, last 7 games, I think, of last year, he really came on and
went off
and looked great. And so is that a flash in the pan, or is that what we can expect from him? And I don't know. And as far as Alton Robinson, this is a guy that you look at a stat sheet and you don't see a lot of his name on there. But
he had a single sack and 4 quarterback hits on 400 defensive snaps last year.
But when he was on the field, stuff happened. Good things happened. He ended up not making the play, but he would get pressure and that would cause a thing, or he'd cause the quarterback to move and allow Darrell Taylor to get home.
Is this truly a new role for him this year?
It's the same role.
Doing the same thing?
He's in the role he was in last year, as an outside linebacker, because they put him at the strong side linebacker in last year's scheme. And
so what do you think was the difference? I mean, he had 4 sacks when he was a rookie. Everything pointed as an upward trajectory than he had last year. Really wasn't as effective, at least according statistically.
Because his rookie year, there wasn't a lot of depth. So he got opportunities to be that situational pass rusher guy, and he did it as a Leo. So his entire role was to put his hand on the ground and then beat the offensive tackle around the corner so he could get to the quarterback. He didn't have to do anything else. He didn't have to think about anything else. Last year, he was outside linebacker. They had him dropping into coverage. They had him reading running backs. They had him with a bunch more responsibilities. And yeah, statistically, the numbers weren't there, but the defense was still better when he was on the field.
He does jump off the page, doesn't he?
He really does. And it's one of those things where I think if you look just at the stats, when Bruce Irvin was in a similar role to what Alton Robinson was playing last year, right? He didn't have great stats. But he was made a huge impact on the defense and the game plans in the game. And Robinson kind of got stuck in that same boat. It was a role that isn't featured and doesn't end up with a lot on the stat sheet, but is super important to making everything else work. And he kind of got put into that role last year, and I thought he did pretty well at it. He's going to get an opportunity to stay in that role and continue to grow. I want to see him also get the opportunity to put his hand on the ground and just go kill quarterbacks, because his first step, his ability to get upfield before the offensive lineman even gets out of their stance is uncommon, right? The last player we had, Michael Bennett, who was similar in his first step, although Michael Bennett was more of an inside pass rusher, whereas, Robinson's on the outside, but that first step is elite and it's really hard to stop.
I am interested to see what Boye Mafe ends up doing, with that, because I understand he's twitched up like crazy, but I understand in college he had a reputation for getting off the ball late. but nonetheless was twitchy. So if they can figure that out, he's going to be special too. Did you have another category?
I had one more, and that's the leadership without Bobby Wagner. And his on-field performance and everything for his entire career, and one of the greatest to ever put a helmet on. But Bobby Wagner's impact on Seattle was more than that. It was more than just him being, 6-time All-Pro, 7-time All-Pro. He was the leader in the locker room. For a while, it was Cam Chancellor and Bobby. Then Cam got hurt, and it became just Bobby. And Wagner was, he was the guy that held other people accountable. He was the guy that kept people together. He talked people off ledges when they were pissed. He was the guy. And yeah, they can replace some of his production because he's been in that declining portion of his career where he's got a little older. But can you replace the other things that Bobby Wagner did? And they want Jordan Brooks to do that. They want Jamal Adams to do that. We will see, because there's only one Bobby Wagner.
Yeah, I'd say initially no. You can't replace that. And conversely, on the other side of the ball, you're missing Russell Wilson. So this team is void of some top end leadership. And it's time for transition. It just is. And the team's going to, guys are going to have to step up. I think the team has had conversations with a few guys. I know DK Metcalf's, name was mentioned specifically by Pete Carroll as a guy that he expects to step into a leadership role. I know that Jordan Brooks on the defensive side of the ball has been talked about in the same manner. And it's just a matter of style. How do those guys operate? Are those guys more vocal now? Are they less vocal, but better production on the field or whatever it is? I know DK Metcalf has had a little bit of a rub against him as far as the maturity level, kind of allowing players to be effective against him mentally in games. We'll see if that changes a little bit this year, just based on that new expectation. The only other one I had is, do we have the personnel to stop the run? I know that Pete Carroll is one of his tenets on defense is stopping the run, limiting explosive plays, et cetera. But stopping the run is definitely a pillar. And last year we were third in the NFL in yards allowed per carry. And I'm just wondering, and that was essentially with Poona Ford and Al Woods, Brian Monet coming in periodically to do that as well. They re-signed Monet to an extension. They've got Poona Ford and Al Woods. Al Woods came back on a 2-year deal. They added Shelby Harris and Quentin Jefferson. Shelby Harris is actually a pretty decent run defender. I think he's got a 76 or 78 grade in Pro Football Focus defending the run. Quentin Jefferson's not known for that, but they're not asking him to do that, essentially. What is your thought on stopping the run and how important it is to this defense?
Well, I think, as you said, they've got kind of the big bodies, which is the first thing you have to do. If you want to stop the run, your first job is to have the big bodies that are good at it in the middle. Don't let them have holes. Keep your linebackers clean. The second thing you've got to do is you got to have your edge setters. You got to, where the running back does not get outside of them, and you force them back into the middle where help is. And that's the part that I want to see before I'm say that they have the guys to do it, because it's a harder job than it sounds. And
that's one of the reasons why I think maybe LJ Collier makes the team. I know we did a roster evaluation show a few weeks back, and LJ Collier was one of your last cuts. And he was one of my last saves per se. And I did it specifically for that, is just being the backup to Shelby Harris, essentially, in stopping the run.
Well, but again, that's the interior guy. In a 3-4, the guys that set the edge are your outside linebacker. These are your pass rushers. Can Boye Mafe set an edge and do that job in that role?
He's 262 pounds. He's got a shot.
He has the ability to. We know Darrell Taylor has the ability to, although he made a few mistakes last year and let some plays get outside of him. But it's more of, what is their technique? How are they at reading angles? Can they get up on a block and manipulate what's going on so that the running back's reads are always to cut in rather than out? And there's some just nuance to that. And we've got a lot of really young players that are learning it. They have the ability at 260 pounds. Boye Mafe, Daryl Taylor, Alton Robinson, those guys they have the ability to do it, but is their game refined enough too? And so that's the second part of stopping the run. And then the third part is just having your interior linebackers get upfield and make the tackle. You've kept them clean. You forced the running back into them, and those guys got to come up and make the tackle.
What is your impression about Cody Barton? Is Cody Barton strong enough to play middle linebacker in the NFL?
To play a true middle linebacker in a 3-4, in a 4-3, borderline. As a guy in a 3-4 where there's two interior linebackers and he's got a tackling machine like Brooks beside him, I actually think he does. His speed, his coverage ability, make him an asset, and he's just got to get up and make plays. The one thing he can't do is be in position to make the tackle after a 1 yard gain and miss and have it turn into a 6 or 7 yard gain by the time Brooks can cover for him. Yeah.
Cause I look at Cody Barton as more of an arm tackler as opposed to a form tackler. It seems like Cody's chasing a lot and running down things, and he's sideline to sideline. I think he's got that sort of speed and so forth.
He does.
But as far as getting in front of somebody and just overpowering somebody, he's not that player. He just isn't. But it'll be interesting, that combo. He's definitely going to get that shot. I don't see anybody else other than Cody Barton having that second starting spot inside. There's just nobody else on the roster. I just can't see it now. I mean, things could change, but
yeah, I mean, you've got Donker and Radigan are the backups, and the guy whose name I can't pronounce, and Nick Ballore, right? And those last two are special teams players who are going to be on the roster as a linebacker in name only. Who's the other guy that can do that can really get sideline to sideline and make those plays? Ballore's got to be he's got to step up and do it. He can get it. He's got the athleticism to get himself in position, but he's got him actually make the tackle. And that's been one of the rubs against him is missed tackles. Now as you were saying, he's great in a chase position. If it's an outside running play and he's coming from the inside, he can run down any running back and get them down. But when their running back's running right at him, that's when he makes those mistakes and doesn't make the tackle, and that can be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you don't often see Cody Barton drive a player backwards.
Yeah, that's not.
He's more of a tackle and hold and pull down, and any running back with any momentum is getting an extra 3 yards on that contact. That's just my opinion. I think that's why he hasn't. You mentioned injuries, but I think one of the other issues is the fact that he's just not as stout as other linebackers. I mean, I think he's going to be playing outside of his normal position a little bit in this defense.
I think that's actually is his best position.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he would have been fine in the 4-3 in Bobby Wagner's spot. Not Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright's spot, the weak side linebacker, because there's a lot of coverage and there's a lot of like that kind of stuff involved in that position. As a true interior, where he has to replace Bobby Wagner and get upfield and make those tackles at the line of scrimmage, he wasn't going to be as good at that.
No.
Now there's two of them in the middle, and so he's got help. He's got coverage. He's got the ability to. If he comes up, as long as he can affect the play, the running back.
All he needs to do is squeeze.
If he can get the running back,
yeah.
If he can get the running back to stop their feet and cut, he's going to cut right into Jordan Brooks, who's going to eat his lunch. And so I think it's actually probably the best situation for Cody Barton. And we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's why the team is comfortable. with where they're at. So yeah, we'll see. Anything else?
No, you got all of mine. The new scheme, life without Bobby, Jamal Adams usage, the cornerback battle, and the depth in the interior linebacker.
Yeah.
So those were my 5.
Yeah. I'm done. I just, mine was pass rush. What can we expect from certain players, the coaching staff, Jamal Adams, and the cornerback room. So yeah, I think we're covered. Practice starts tomorrow. I'm not expecting any big news or anything like that. We might see a signing. Maybe it's DK Metcalf. I know that there's 2 rookies. I think Bryant and Walker still need to sign their contracts. I would imagine that happens at any moment. Yeah, fun. It's going to be fun. Next time we show up, we're going to be talking about what we've seen so far in practice. That's great. Now we get a chance to talk about what
we're actually watching football on a field and talking about it. It's been a long time. This is what happens when the Seahawks don't make the playoffs and don't make a run in the playoffs. The offseason just gets longer.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know. And based on our early predictions, we're probably looking at the same thing next year. I know. Hang in there, man. Hang in there.
Jimmy Garoppolo to the rescue.
I don't know if we can say that, but better than what we have.
Yeah. So,
all right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. You know where the show's at on all your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Subscribe and share. Until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.